guys, this is Miss Meyer, and we are going to be talking about the causes of the American Revolution. First, I wanted to introduce you to my helpers who will be here throughout the year to help us understand anything that we may have some questions about. My first helper is Albert Einstein. Say hello, Albert.
Hello. My name is Albert Einstein.
Well, thank you, Albert. He's going to be assisting us. Thank you, Albert. Thank you. Next is someone extremely famous that you guys are just going to absolutely love. And one moment, please. Here she is, Miss Marilyn Monroe. Hello. Hello, boys and girls. I'm so excited. Oh, it's all right, Marilyn. You calm yourself down. We fixed her dress. These are children, Marilyn. Next, we have Mr. Ulysses S. Grant right here.
Where is he? Where are the kids? Where are they? My name is Ulysses S. Grant. Hello, I'm here to help you.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. We're going to be using you a lot when we start talking about the Civil War. Okay? Then we have Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Hello. My name is Thomas Jefferson, and I am the writer of the Declaration of Independence. Thank you. We're going to be using you a lot right now. Then we have two awesome I guess we're going to talk about Civil War era, time period, people. All right, and here we have Mr. Frederick Douglass and Mrs. Harriet Tubman. Thank you, guys. They're really going to help us, especially when we start to learn about the Civil War. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get started. I know I found these lovely little toys in Washington, D.C., and I just had to buy them. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the causes of the American Revolution. The first thing before we get into the American Revolution is we need to talk about the French and Indian War. Now, the big thing that I want to drill into you, Albert wants to drill it in as well. Who fought the French and Indian War, Albert?
It was France and Great Britain.
That's right. You heard Albert. France and Great Britain. The reason it was called the French and Indian War was because the French fought with the Indians, who really weren't Indians, they were Native Americans, against the British. So it was, and I have so much glare with my glasses. I'm so sorry, guys. It was the French fought French, Native Americans versus Great Britain. That was the French and Indian War. Well, when the French and Indian War happened, it was really over land. Both France and Great Britain wanted control over land, especially Canada, and areas in the United States that were disputed against. You see, France and England, Great Britain, they wanted to make bank money, right? They wanted lots and lots of money. And the way that they were going to be able to do this was by fur trading. Now, fur trading was like the biggest, money-making thing ever. Let me tell you about fur trading. They would capture their animal like this. I know we're gonna fur trade you. I'm gonna skin you alive and trade your fur. All right. So they would take this animal. Let's say that Tigger here is a beaver, or it was stuff like that. Beavers, ox cats, ocelots, deer, things like that. So they would take it, kill the poor animal, like Tiggy here. They would take off their fur, all their skin, they just take it off, and then they would sell it overseas to make clothes and furniture and other things like that and make money. He's biting me all. He's like, try and fur trade me, woman. All right, and so that's what they were doing. That was the big way to make money. That was how they were making some serious bank. And England and France were fighting over the land to capture these animals. So he's gone. He's like, oh, I'm sticking around here. So England and France had these big like a war. A serious war went on, and it was over land. Now, the Native Americans fought on the side of the French because the French were much nicer to them. The British were coming there, and they were basically taking their land, saying, hey, get out of here, it's mine now. They were coming up to the Native Americans and saying, oh, you lived here for generations? Oh, that's okay, because now it's my house, and just throwing them out. Whereas the French, they were saying, we don't want to make you leave. We don't want to kick you out. We want to, let's work together. Let's be friends, stuff like that. So the French were much more willing to work with the Native Americans against the British, okay? Long story short, the French and Indian War ended, and Britain, we got a victory. They won. We won. And the early Americans, even George Washington, old G-Dog, who was like super tall for his time, and I have a picture of his teeth. Watch! Now, he was a great general, and one of the reasons that he gained so much notoriety and why they decided to make Washington this big hero was because he did such a good job during the French and Indian War. So when the colonists decided that they were going to go take on Great Britain, they said, G-Dog, man, George Washington, he is awesome. He is the guy that we need to go to. He is our go-to general. Now, what happened after that was that basically the first battle of the war, of the French and Indian War, was taken place at a place called Fort Necessity. Now, I'm telling you this because you will be asked this. The French and Indian War took place from 1754 until 1763. The British was against the French and the Native Americans. So France and England, hold on. Here comes another helper. They need to come and help us. What do you want to say about it, Marilyn? I love the French. Thank you, Marilyn. Whatever. Whatever. All right. So France versus England. Well, France and Native Americans versus England. Okay? Now, other information about the war. These are two battles that you need to know. They're important. I wouldn't tell you about them if they weren't important. They were, the first one is the first battle. The first battle, number one. That battle was taken at a place called Fort Necessity. Oh my gosh. Do y'all know way back when, during this time, they didn't call bathrooms? They called them the necessaries. Well, the first battle of the French and Indian War was called Fort Necessity. The site of the major battle that you're going to be asked about was at Fort Duquesne. That's a French name. Fort Duquesne. I might have to ask Miss Howard how to say that. That was the major battle. So let's remember, what do we think? Thomas, can you help us? What do we need? The first battle was fought at Fort Necessity. The major battle was fought at Fort Duquesne. Thank you, Tom. All right, just remember that. Okay? Fort Duquesne was a French fort at the point where the Allegheny and the Monongahela rivers would flow together to form the Ohio River. And this was this big battle that kind of turned the tides and let Great Britain win the war. So, Great Britain, the French-Indian War is coming to a close. And what ends this war is called the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Now, the important thing to remember about these kinds of treaties is they're always named after the place where they signed the treaty. So, the Treaty of Paris is the name of the treaty that ended the French and Indian War, and it's also the name of the treaty that ended the American Revolution. It's just two different time periods. The first one that we're going to be talking about dealing with the French and Indian War is the Treaty of Paris of 1763. So this treaty ended the French and the Indian War. It gave France gave Canada and all of its land east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain, with the exception of New Orleans. I'm telling you, oh, I love New Orleans. It's such a great, Maryland, oh, please. So, New Orleans was the only place that it said you cannot have New Orleans, because New Orleans controls the mouth of the Mississippi. And by controlling the mouth of the Mississippi, they control all of the Mississippi River. And this is why France was pretty sneaky. France knew that if they maintained New Orleans, if Great Britain wanted to ship the furs back to Great Britain to sell, they would have to come down the Mississippi River. And by doing that, they would have to pass into French territory. And when they did, and they tried to leave out of the port of New Orleans to go back to England, they would have to pay France a tax. So that is why they kept New Orleans. Okay? So interesting, right? And this is like New Orleans, and this is why New Orleans was a gumbo. We were controlled by the French, then the Spanish, then the French. But we're going to get to that all later. So France gave Great Britain all this land, but it kept New Orleans for itself. They can maintain control over that. Now, they gave New Orleans at this time, and this is where it's crazy, they gave New Orleans actually to Spain. Now, even though they gave New Orleans to Spain, they really controlled it themselves. You know, they had lost the war, and they wanted to appear to Great Britain as though they were getting rid of all of their property. Oh, it's all going to be gone. I'm getting rid of it all. But Spain and France were friends. Frenemies, kind of. They really didn't like each other, but they disliked Great Britain a whole lot more than they disliked each other. So they worked together. So France pretended to give the land to Spain. So here you go, Spain. Take this land. I'm giving it to Spain. But really, France had total control. Spain did not have the manpower, the ability, really, to control New Orleans. The main thing in New Orleans is that the people who were living in New Orleans didn't even see themselves as Spanish. They tried to kill the governor that Spain sent over to New Orleans. Tried to kill him. Had him locked in his house with a pitchfork because they said that they were French and not Spanish. So Spain had zero control. It was all like a figurehead. Yes, Spain was in control, whatever. It was really France. But France did that just so that Great Britain would say, okay, fine, give it away. But they were really the ones in control. Spain had been an ally of France during the war. They were friends. So Great Britain was like this big mamma jamma. They were the big dogs in the race, and everybody wanted to go up against them. But the problem was that Great Britain at this time was this huge empire, and they were trying to take over all kinds of places in the world. In Africa, in Asia, in the Americas, over in Europe. They were massive. And so what blows my mind was that these little bitty colonists, these little bitty guys, were able to join up and to overtake this huge empire. Now, the Royal Proclamation of 1763 is another big cause of the American Revolution. What this did was make it illegal for colonists to move west of the Appalachian Mountains. It made them stay in that one little area, and that's why we pretty much have those 13 original colonies, because that was the area that they were made to stay. It said, you cannot leave, you cannot go there. Well, the British were hoping that this would help them maintain the good relations with the Native Americans. Native Americans did not like these new colonists that were coming over here. Native Americans have been living in this land for hundreds of years. That would be like this. Say you and your mama and your daddy, you live in a house that your grandma had, and your great-grandma had, and your great-grandma had, for generations been living in this house, fixing it up, generation after generation. Well, all of a sudden, one day, this guy comes in, he says, hey, get out, it's mine now. I don't care how long you've been living here. That is exactly what was happening. So the Native Americans were extremely angry at these colonists. They're like, who do you think you are? So the king, at the time, King George, thought, well, I think it would be good if we tell them they have to stay there, because these colonists were wanting to get away from that. because these little confrontations with the Native Americans, they were not friendly. More often than not, it was violence and somebody ended up dead. And it wasn't always, you would think, oh, it's the Native Americans because colonists had guns. Oh, no, not at all. These Native Americans, they meant business, especially the Apaches and the Comanches. They just take your head, they slice your head right here, and they scalp you. They just yank off your scalp and leave you for dead. It's insane. So, oh, this is a picture of it. Okay, so what they would do is that the king decided that if by making them stay in this land, it would make them work with the Native Americans. Well, the exact opposite kind of happened because it angered the colonists who were planning to move away to grow huge farms and things like that. And a lot of colonists chose to ignore this land and moved away, moved anyway. And this resulted in a lot of attacks by Native Americans on the settlers. The Native Americans were extremely afraid that now not only were these people coming in and taking, their land that was along the East Coast, the East Coast, they were now taking the land that was moving west. So it was a big problem for the Native Americans and the colonists. So in the years before the American Revolution, the British began to take a more active role in governing the American colonies. At first, it was pretty much they kind of left them to their own devices. They kind of said, do what you got to do. They didn't really care. But after the French and Indian War, the British started really imposing a lot of sanctions on these colonists. And the reason was the French and Indian War was extremely expensive. It cost Great Britain a lot of money, and Great Britain did not have the ability to pay for this war. It did not have the funds. So instead of getting the money by taxing British citizens, they sent it to the American colonists. At this point, we weren't really the Americans yet. And this is why. Before Parliament and King George could tax the people living in Great Britain, he would have to get that approved by Parliament. He would need Parliament, which is basically their Congress, approve these new taxes. Well, there was no way at all that Parliament was going to approve these new taxes. They were going to say, you're out of your box, George, go home. That's what they would say. So George and England needed to find a way to pay for it. Well, the colonists had no representation in Parliament. That was the whole big thing. No taxation without representation. They had no voice in Parliament. So when Great Britain wanted to tax them, they just taxed them because there was nobody to speak out on their behalf. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams actually at one point went to Great Britain and say, hey, hold up. You need to stop. Slow your roll. You need to quit with us. Still didn't listen. Still taxed them. Well, this made the people that were living in the colonies extremely upset. So the Proclamation of 1763 basically was meant to, it restricted colonists. Wait, I want to say this. What we're going to be talking about now is that the big taxes that really kind of went on with the whole causes of the American Revolution. So the first one that we're going to talk about is called the Sugar Act, okay? And it basically was the first of lots of the new taxes that were placed on the colonies at this time. This was a 3-cent tax on foreign sugar, foreign meaning places other than England, Spain, France, places in South America, places in Africa. It was and 3 cents at that time was big money. Okay, big money. And this was a way for England to increase revenue and to stop smuggling between the American colonies and the West Indies, because we were really smuggling in a lot of our sugar from over in Asia, in the West Indies. So they put this in place to kind of stop this huge tax, because anything that was coming in, they started paying a tax on. And this is why, let me explain this a little bit better. most of the colonists, the majority of them, have come from England. They came from English families. Even if they were born in the colonies, their parents were English. And what the English like to do, what is great fun for them, is to have tea. They always have tea. Would you like some hot tea? Would you like a spot of tea? That was a big deal. So the problem is that the colonists thought that the English tea was too expensive. It was way too expensive. So they were smuggling, getting cheaper tea from India and using that tea. Well, Great Britain said, why are you not using our tea? So rather than lower the price of their tea to match the price of the India tea, they put a tax on any foreign tea coming into the colonies. So even though you were going to pay, if you have 2 things of tea, so let's pretend like I have 2 things of tea. Hold on. All right, so this is my tea. Let's pretend this, although one is water and the other one is coffee, because I don't drink tea, because I'm an American. No. Well, I mean, you can drink tea and be an American. That's totally fine. So let's just say this is my cup of tea, my American tea that's coming here, and I'm buying this from India, and it's only, let's say, I don't know, 10 cents a bag, whatever, which is a lot of money, but let's just say 10 cents a bag. Well, this is my English tea coming from America, and this is 15 cents a bag. Well, naturally, you're going to want to buy the cheaper tea. Well, England was kind of smart because they said, all right, this is still going to be 15 cents for a bag, and this is still going to be 10 cents a bag. But when that bag comes over and crosses into the colonies, not only will you have to pay 10 cents a bag, but you'll have to pay 10 cents tax. So you're looking at spending 20 cents for a cup of Indian tea rather than the 15 cents for the British tea. So by doing this, it was making people want to buy the British tea. But it didn't only do that. It also made the American colonists so angry because they were like, how do you do that? How can you do that? That's just not fair. So that's the way that they were getting really mad. That was the first thing. The second thing that was doing it to them was the Currency Act. And I gotta take a sip of my water, or my tea, my English tea. Okay, so similar to the Sugar Act, the Currency Act was enacted in 1764, and this was a way to increase revenue, which revenue means money, for the British. It required that all colonial assemblies stop printing paper money. This is why the colonies, all of the individual colonies, were printing their own money. And it was creating a problem because they were not using British money. And by doing this, let's say I live in Rhode Island, the colony of Rhode Island, and I want to go buy, Thomas here, he wants to go and buy his jacket. It's a lovely jacket, Thomas. Thank you. All right, so let's say he wants to go and buy this jacket over in Rhode Island. So rather than having to pay enormous taxes by using British money, he decides he's going to use Rhode Island money so that he can not pay as much taxes. Well, the British noticed what that was going on, and they said, no, you can no longer use your own money. You must use the British pound or 6 pence or whatever. And this made the colonists even angrier. They said, hey, if you are going to tax us like this, then you should have somebody talking on our behalf in Parliament. Well, that didn't happen. So there was lots of problems with that. The next one that they had was the Townshend Acts. The Stamp Act. Sorry, let's talk about the Stamp Act. So in 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, and this required colonists to use specially stamped paper for all official documents, newspapers, and pamphlets. Beast! Ugh. Beast is my dog. He's quite old. He's 13. He's 12. And he can barely walk, but he can't control his gas. He has the worst gas. And he finds it necessary to lay very close to me while I'm sitting here and farts.
I don't eat anything anymore.
Like, really bad. It's really bad. So, the Stamp Act basically made them put this thing on every single document, newspaper, pamphlet, everything. And this really angered the colonists because this was just a way to, to raise money for the British, but it really hurt the Americans because during this time period, there's no Facebook, there's no Instagram, there's no iPhones or internet, there's no anything like that. So everything is printed. The news, there's no TV station. They can't get on to, CNN or Fox News or whatever. They have to read about it in the newspaper. If they want to talk to their friends, if they want to get their point across, they've got to write a letter. They can't just text them. So everything they do is using paper. And when the British put the stamp tax in there, they were having to use and put the specific stamp on all of their pieces of paper. And they had to buy the stamp. Well, the early colonists, with the exception of Thomas Jefferson here, did not have a lot of money. Most of them were poor farmers. They didn't have money to go out and buy all these stamps. It was just another big problem that the colonists had. Riots broke out. This was a big problem. This was a huge thing. This angered many colonists. They saw these new laws as a way for the British government to raise money at the expense of the colonists without the consent of the colonial assembly. Basically, like I said before, no taxation without representation. Riots were breaking out in colonial cities, and American merchants, they said, we are no longer going to buy British goods. We are not going to do that. And they really did. Boycotting what they did makes a big deal. It's really made a big difference. By saying we're not going to buy British goods, and they didn't buy British goods, it hurt the British. So they got rid of the stamp tax because it was really hurting them financially to keep that open. Next, we have the Townshend Act. And that was, this is a really long one. We're not going to be able to do it all. Townshend Act is the next one, and this is why this is a big deal. Now, the reason they did not like this was because, unlike the stamp tax and the sugar tax, if you did not buy sugar, then you wouldn't pay the tax. If you did not use stamps, then you did not pay the tax. Well, the Townshend tax was a tax on things like lead, glass, tea, paint, paper, anything like that. And the colonists, even if you didn't use these things, you still paid the tax. It was still a big thing. They ended up paying the taxes, even if they didn't use the stuff, because merchants, people that's selling the stuff, would rise the cost of these items to compensate for the taxes having to pay for them. Let me make this a little bit clearer. So, let's say like this. Let's say I am selling my tea. I'm selling it, okay? I'm selling it to you. And I'm getting my tea from Great Britain. Well, here's my tea, and I'm getting it from Great Britain. Now, I'm paying Great Britain, I'm paying them, let's say, 25 cents for this big jug of tea. So they raised the tax with the Townshend tax, and now are charging me 50 cents. Well, I've got to make my money somehow. I've got to make some money. I got to make ends meet. So I am going to charge you double of what you were paying. So that's what was going on with the Townshend tax. So before, if you didn't buy tea, that's no big deal. You didn't buy a stamp, no big deal. Well, the merchants of all different things, started raising their prices because not only was it just tea or a stamp or a piece of sugar, it was now on almost everything. And that's why the Townshend taxes were so influential. Okay? The Boston Massacre was a time period of the French and Indian War, and Boston became the center of colonial resistance. This was like the hub. This was before there was a Washington, D.C., it was Boston. Okay? So the British had sent troops in to kind of manage these colonists, these patriots that were coming up, because people were getting really ticked at what was going on. So England and George sent all these men, these army basically, to keep order and protect their interests. Well, in 1770, a group of civilians, a group of patriots, started a riot outside the old State House. So the soldiers that were stationed at the building fired into the crowd and killed 5 people. Now, it was a big deal. And one of the attorneys in the Boston Massacre, in fact, the attorneys for the British, was John Adams. Now, this is pretty much how it went down. We don't know how it is. But the colonists were taunting these British soldiers. They were throwing rocks at them and spitting at them. And these soldiers were pretty much just staying still. But these colonists were doing all kind of stuff, telling them the worst of things. Well, it has been said that one of the colonists in the crowd shouted, "Fire!" like that. And one of the British soldiers thought that meant time to fire, and shot his gun, and he killed someone. Well, the colonists started freaking out and going and hitting and throwing and getting even worse. So more of them fired, and in the end, 5 people were killed. Well, the British felt that the Americans had greatly exaggerated the details, really, and they did. The Americans, the colonists, used this as propaganda, basically saying, look at what they did. They're killing these innocent men. Look at the blood that they've got on their hands. And in fact, Paul Revere's famous engraving of the Boston Massacre shows these poor colonists with blood just all over the place, and the British soldiers like, "Her!" When in all actuality, that's not what happened. This just shows you how propaganda really works. So the Boston Tea Party is what came next. So now the people were all enraged. They were all hopped up and be like, yeah, let's get them. Let's get the British. Not everybody was willing to join this movement against the British. After the Boston Massacre, you had even more people that were just so upset. I mean, truly upset. In the Boston Tea Party in 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. And this basically allowed the British East India Tea Company to sell tea directly to the colonies without paying taxes. So this left colonial merchants in a lurch, really, because they themselves were having to pay huge taxes on the tea that they imported. So as a result, the British people, the British Tea Company, was making more money because they were able to sell the tea cheaper, because the colonists who were selling their tea were having to pay this huge Townshend tax, and were having to tax the colonists in order to pay for it. Well, the colonists, the patriots, the people of America at this time, they were so upset with Great Britain that they said, I don't care if your tea is free. I'm not paying for it. I'm not buying it. And to show how much they did not like it and did not want their tea, they dressed up as some Native Americans, and they went aboard the ship. They went aboard the ship that was carrying the tea into New York Harbor and in Boston. They dressed up as Mohawk Indians, and they dumped cargoes of tea from the British ships into the Boston Harbor. Well, Great Britain that was their disguise, the Native Americans. They were pretending to be Native Americans. That was their big disguise. However, the story goes that some of the Indians got quite intoxicated at a local bar and started telling people what it was that he did. And it got back to Great Britain. Well, when Great Britain found out, they were completely incensed. They were so angry that they decided to close Boston Harbor. And when they closed Boston Harbor, that meant that they were going to close it into everything that was coming in. So they could not receive lead, glass, paint, linens, materials, cotton, food. Nothing was coming in unless it was British. And then that was able to charge the colonists whatever they wanted because there was no competition. So the British needed their tea. They needed to have it. So the only tea that was coming in was British tea. And now instead of being 10 cents a big jug like this, they were going to make it 50 cents. And you know what else? Because Great Britain closed the harbor, they had no choice but to buy it. And that was really, really made them mad, okay? The next thing was the Intolerable Acts. Say that 3 times fast. Intolerable, intolerable. I just like the word. All right. So the Intolerable Acts were passed after the Boston Tea Party. And they were a series of acts that were known just to be intolerable, which is like the worst. The Boston Port Act was the first, and that closed the Boston Harbor. That's what we just talked about. The second was the Administration of Justice Act, and that allowed for the governor of Massachusetts to change the location of a trial for royal officers to another colony or even to Great Britain. Why this caused a problem? Well, let's just pretend, and we're going to use Albert here. Let's pretend that Albert, why are you picking on me? Oh, I just love you, Albert. Okay. All right. So let's pretend that Albert is a colonist in Massachusetts, and he spoke badly about King George. Well, instead of being tried, he was in Massachusetts, and a lot of people like him in Massachusetts. You know, he's got friends in Massachusetts. Well, rather than being tried in Massachusetts and having a fair trial, they were going to take poor Albert here and send him to Great Britain to be tried by a British court and a British jury. Well, one of the main things as Americans that we value is to have a jury of our peers, people who are kind of indifferent and listen to the facts and then make a decision. Well, by sending Albert over to Great Britain, do you really think that those British parliamentarians were going to like him? They didn't care what he had to say. He was a colonist. He was a rebel rouser. And of course they were going to be against him. So this really made it very difficult for any American to get a fair trial. The third one was the Massachusetts Government Act, and this put the government of Massachusetts under the control of a royal governor. No longer is there a colonial legislature. There's nobody else. Like before, people like Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Sam Adams, they all had positions of power. Not anymore. It was now all going to be controlled by the governor, a royal governor, that would answer to the king. Now, the colonial legislature was no longer allowed to meet, and town meetings were only allowed to be once per year. And those meetings had to be overseen by British military and royal governors. So you can imagine how much talk actually happened in these meetings. You think these meetings, they allowed them to say anything bad about Great Britain? I don't think so. Not at all. So they said that this limited their free speech. My camera's being all crazy. There we go. All right. So we're almost finished. All right. So now we're going to talk about the committees of correspondence. The committees of correspondence were formed as a way to increase communication between the colonies because they could not really talk about anything in these meetings anymore because the British were overseeing them. The correspondence committee was a way for them to really talk to one another, kind of on the down low, keeping it a secret. Well, keeping it, beast! The Loyalists and the Patriots. This was the difference, okay? Not everybody in America or in the colonies at this time wanted to separate from Great Britain. They didn't think that it was a good idea. For one, we didn't have a regulated army. We only had a militia. We didn't have a currency. We didn't have the ability to run ourselves. And a lot of people were very, very fearful that this was going to be a big mistake. And all it would do is cost people a lot of lives. So you had two types of people. You had loyalists and a patriot. A patriot wanted independence from Great Britain and wanted to form their own country. A loyalist decided that they wanted to stay part of Great Britain. Kind of like, okay, I live in Texas, right? Well, Texas, part of our Constitution maintains that we have the right to be our own country if we choose to, because we were once our own country. We have a lot of people, Rick Perry, a former governor, used to say, oh, we're going to break away from America and become the Republic of Texas again. And I, for one, thought that was a really stupid idea because we were not prepared to stand on our own. And the Americans, the people living in the colonies at that time, not every single one of them thought that that was a good idea either. They thought that by going off on their own, they were by no means going to be able to really protect themselves. And those people were called your loyalists. The third group, one group of, historians estimate that loyalists made up of perhaps 16% of the people of the revolution. That meant that as many as 500,000 colonists remained loyal to Great Britain when the American Revolution broke out. The Sons of Liberty were a group of patriots that were against many of the policies that the British government had before and after the American Revolution. Famous patriots, Sons of Liberty. It was actually, I think, on History Channel, there was something called the Sons of Liberty. Were John Adams, there's just some of them, Paul Revere, Patrick Henry, John Hancock, Sam Adams. There was a third group who remained neutral during the war, and those were the Quakers. These were the group of people that did not like war, and they weren't on anybody's side. They were the Quakers, and they were just peaceful people. And so during the Revolution, you had three groups of people. You had your loyalists, your patriots, and then you had your people that didn't like war at all, kind of like your hippies, man. Yeah, woo, peace and love. Those were your Quakers. Okay, you know the guy on Quaker oatmeal? They were your Quakers. Okay, so 3 more topics and then we are done. The next one was the Daughters of Liberty. So the language of the Revolutionary period spoke to equality for more people, and liberty, equality, freedom, becoming independence. It was a really big attractive thing, especially to women, because women, at this time in colonial America, they had very little rights. They didn't. They couldn't really, some women could, but most women couldn't own property. They had to defer to their husbands or their fathers or their brothers. They couldn't serve in Parliament. They couldn't serve in colonial assembly. They couldn't be in the army. They basically were just, work at home and raise the children, and if they weren't married, they worked as teachers or nurses. But these women who worked at home, they didn't have this wonderful little lifestyle where they sat and ate bonbons all day and watched, Days of Our Lives. They worked in the fields. They were out there maintaining the crops and gathering stuff and cooking. I'm not joking to you. There's one thing I read. It was about this woman during colonial times, and her day went like this. Woke up, fed the animals, the farm animals, milked the cow, chopped the head off the chicken and plucked him for dinner, gave birth, plowed the field, cooked dinner, so made men's, did you hear? Gave birth. So these women, these colonial women, they had a lot on their plate. So these women, when they heard about independence and freedom, they saw more than just freedom and independence from Great Britain. They saw a role for themselves. They saw an ability to become more than what they were, kind of this lot in life. And sadly, not until 1920s, that did not happen for them. The first Continental Congress was gotten together after the passage of the Intolerable Acts. And it was at this Continental Congress that they decided that they should pass a declaration of grievances that condemned the Intolerable Acts. Okay? It basically said, hey, Great Britain, we are upset with you. You are not doing right by us. We are not going to listen to you. These are not fair. It wasn't the Declaration of Independence. It was a declaration of grievances. Basically, why they were ticked off. That's what it was, against the Intolerable Acts. And in this list of grievances, they said that if Britain did not repeal the Intolerable Acts by September of 1775, that all colonial exports to Britain, Ireland, and the West Indies would be cut off. Because Great Britain used North America, used the colonies for indigo, tobacco, sugar, wheat, cotton, wool. All of these things were being shipped from us to Great Britain and their other big parts in the West Indies and in Ireland. So we said, hey, Great Britain, hey, George, you better start treating us right, or we're not going to send you any more cotton. We're not going to send you any more tobacco or indigo or sugar or anything or salt or anything like that. You better stop. You better treat us right. Well, you think George listened to that favorably? No. George was not happy. And he decided that he wasn't going to listen to them. So the Declaration of Independence was drafted in 1776, and that is because King George said, "You don't tell me what to do, colonists. You don't come at me and don't you give me demands. Don't you tell me what to do." You know, it's kind of like a parent. You know, if you tell your mom, "Well, if you don't do this, I'm not doing this." And they're like, "Boy, you better watch your mouth." You know, when they call you by your first and second name, your mom and dad, when they're really mad, like, "Jennifer, Rebecca." That's how King George was. He was like, "Colonial states." Well, he didn't listen to him. He didn't do what we had asked him to do. So the Declaration of Independence was drafted in 1776, and it had the purpose of justifying the separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain. It listed the grievances of the colonists against the British government and against King George III. And it basically showed Great Britain that they had abused their power and they could no longer rule over the colonies. The Declaration was written by Thomas Jefferson. You old stinker, you. He's so modest. And Thomas Jefferson did not want to write this. He did not want to write it. But he was kind of like pressured into it by John Adams. Really, he was. It was based a lot on Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Now, Common Sense was a little booklet, not a full book, a small little booklet. And this booklet said that it would be in the colony's best interest to separate from Great Britain. Now, by many of the patriots, but not all of them, signed the Declaration of Independence. And in fact, the reason that John Hancock's signature is so large is because he wanted to make a gesture to King George, saying, "Yeah, this is what I think about all of your laws," and wrote it so big as to, be, I don't know. So, not all colonists, like I said before, were in favor of independence. Lots of people were not for this, and everybody did not like this. So while you had people cheering and being like, "Yay, independence, independence," you also had people who were like, "Oh, what are we going to do now?" So, and rightfully so, we were not prepared. We didn't have an army. We didn't have a official government. We didn't have official currency. How are we going to go up against the biggest navy in the world when we didn't have one ship to our name? How are we going to go against General Cornwallis, one of the greatest general minds ever, when we don't have anybody, we don't have a formal army? How are we going to do that? How are we going to fund this war when we don't have official money? We don't have a currency. The only thing we operate is with the British pound. How is it? So for all those things to come together and for us to form a country and to get our independence from Great Britain is phenomenal. And we did get a lot of help. And we'll talk about that next time on The Miss Mara Show!